from the 16th century, a number of contemporary artists' books, quite a few rare first editions, and many signed copies. But I still lack today, the funds or the knowledge to become a professional collector. In my library, shiny young penguins sat happily side by side with severe-looking, leather-bound patriarchs. The books most valuable to me were private association copies, such as one of the earliest books I read, a 1930s edition of Grimm's Fairy Tales printed in sombre Gothic type. Many years later, memories of my childhood drifted back whenever I turned the yellowed pages. I set up my library according to my own requirements and prejudices. Unlike a public library, mine demanded no common codes that other readers could understand and share. A certain zany logic governed its geography. Its major sections were determined by the language in which the books were written. That is to say, without distinction of genre, all books written originally in Spanish or French, English or Arabic, the latter a language which I can't speak or read, sat together on a shelf. I allowed myself, however, many exceptions. Certain subjects, the history of the book, biblical commentaries, the legend of Faust, Renaissance literature and philosophy, gay studies, medieval bestiaries, had separate sections. Certain authors and certain genres were privileged. I collected thousands of detective novels, but very few spy stories, more Plato than Aristotle, the complete works of Zola and hardly any Maupassant, all of John Hawkes and Cynthia Ozick, but barely any of the authors on the New York Times bestseller list. I had on the shelves dozens of very bad books which I didn't throw away in case I ever needed an example of a book I thought was bad. Balzac, in Cousin Pons, offered a justification for this obsessive behavior. An obsession is a pleasure that has attained the status of an idea. Though I knew that we were only the keepers of the garden and the house, the books themselves, I felt, belonged to me, were part of who I was. We speak of certain people who are reluctant to lend an ear or a hand. I seldom lent a book. If I wanted someone to read a certain volume, I'd buy a copy and offer it as a gift. I believe that to lend a book is an incitement to theft. The public library of one of my schools carried a warning both exclusionary and generous. These are not your books, they belong to everyone. No such sign could be put up in my library. My library was to me an utterly private space that both enclosed and mirrored me. When I was a child in Israel, where my father was the Argentine ambassador, I was often taken to play in a park that started off as a well-kept garden and faded into sandy dunes. Huge tortoises plodded their way across it, leaving dainty tracks in the sand. Once I found a tortoise whose shell had been half torn off. It seemed to stare at me with its ancient eyes as it dragged itself over the dunes towards the sea beyond, bereft of something that had protected and defined it. I've often felt that my library explained who I was, gave me a shifting self that transformed itself constantly throughout the years. And yet, in spite of this, my relationship to libraries has always been an odd one. I love the space of a library. I love the public buildings that stand like emblems of the identity a society chooses for itself, imposing or unobtrusive, intimidating or familiar. I love the endless rows of books whose titles I try to make out in their vertical script that has to be read, I've never discovered why, from top to bottom in English and Italian, and from bottom to top in German and Spanish. I love the muffled sounds, the pensive silence, the hushed glow of the lamps, especially if they are made of green glass, the desks polished by the elbows of generations of readers, the smell